Welcome to the Soul of Enterprise, Business in the Knowledge Economy, sponsored by Woodard, building your ideal practice with coaching, education, community, and resources. I'm Ed Kless with my friend and co-host Ron Baker, and on today's show, folks, we are crossing the threshold. A new chapter begins. Hey, Ron.
Hey, Ed. How's it going?
Good, good. So I'm looking forward to talking about this subject, but I do a quick feedback based on last week's show. Lots and lots of comments on our tariff show.
Oh, boy.
Juche for Dummies. First of all, people are still confused as to what Juche is. We never really fully explained it, but that's okay.
We tried.
We tried. But the other thing is you were on fire, my friend. You were absolutely on fire.
I've been marinating in it for weeks. I mean, it's crazy. I'm sick of it.
Yeah.
I really am.
All right. So let's cross the threshold and let's talk about transformations. How did this all begin, Ron, for you? And you roped me into it, but
this is such a long story, Ed, but I'll try and do it, try and cut it down. But I think it was in 1998, Joe Pine and James Gilmore had published an article in Harvard Business Review. And I think it was either the experience economy or you are what you charge for. I forget the exact title, but Dan read it, gave it to me and said, we need to do something with this. And so I read it. And in the article, they laid out that progression of economic value. Now we're going to go through that. But when I saw that, when I landed on services, I said, oh, well, this is where CPAs are in the progression of economic value. I said, we deliver services, we do it on time, they're usually customized, everything you would expect. And then the next stage up is experiences. And then it got me and Dan to talking, well, how would you create an experience? Would you put a piano in your office, or how could you create a nice customer experience? But then he got up to transformations, which was the top of the curve, and I was like, oh wow, we do this, but we just don't use this language. And that's kind of how all of this started. So since he only had one example, I think, in the article, and then of course the book came out, we got a hold of the book and read the book as well. And in the same time, Dan and I are writing a course for Cal CPA called The Experience Economy. And we had a different subtitle, but it was basically how CPA firms could use this to decommoditize themselves and get more pricing power. And we tried to do innovative things in that course, like, serve Krispy Kreme donuts, which at the time, would have been like 98, were a big deal. And just tried to make it as a positive experience as we could. We bought the radar baseball, and played catch, across the room, which freaked out the hotel people. But it was a lot of fun, but we didn't really understand all of the implications of this curve. And I certainly didn't understand transformations as well. And since we've had Joe Pine on the show twice, and the first time we had him on, I asked him, so Joe, you've had 25 years to think about this or whatever. What's beyond transformations? And that's when he said, there is nothing beyond transformations on the mortal coil. Yeah, that depends on your spiritual, religious beliefs, whatever. But that's kind of how I got into this. And this progression of economic value has been in every one of my books because it's canonical. I mean, he laid it out so beautifully and explained it so well. And it has nothing to do with business model design. He's describing economic eras. And I didn't understand that back in the day. I completely understand it now, that this is way beyond just a business model. This is a new economic era, as significant as moving from the agricultural economy to the Industrial Revolution, or from the Industrial Revolution into the service economy. So that's kind of how all this started, the roots of it.
Yeah. I first encountered Joe Pine when he came and he spoke at a SAGE event. And this is well after the experience economy came out, but he was talking still about the experience economy. He wasn't talking about the transformation economy. He mentioned it in the book, but he wasn't talking about it. He was talking about experience. And the demo that he gave that day was a great one. What he did was he wheeled a gumball machine onto the stage with him during his keynote presentation. And it was one of those gumball machines that I'm sure all of our listeners have seen outside. Well, back in the day, they don't do this anymore. I don't see gumball machines outside grocery stores anymore, but they used to be a pretty prominent thing. And in this particular gumball machine, what would happen was you would put the quarter in. It wasn't a nickel, it was a quarter for the gumball. And instead of just dropping the ball right into the little slot where you get it out, it dropped it into a helix, like a DNA, right? And it would spin around, and you saw the ball travel down this the spiral, and then you'd get the gumball. And everybody laughed when he did it. And he said, but I want you to understand what just happened here. We now charge 5 times more for the gumball.
Yep.
And we make the customer wait.
Yep.
A longer period of time.
Less efficient.
Less efficient, right? So, which and you talk about mind blowing, and that's exactly right, because kids walking through, they can have the gumball for a nickel and get it right away, but no, mommy, I want to see the come down the spiral, right? I want to have the experience, and that was the thing that really got me into okay, I see what he's talking about by experiences, and we're going to talk a lot about this word. Subsuming the prior experience, what happens before it, because previously you were just getting a good, you were just getting that gumball, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. Why don't you take us back to the beginning, though? I kind of did it in the middle of things, but I think I just wanted to give that illustration because I think it's a great example.
Right. And one of the big things about this whole progression of economic value, they've also put it in the context of pricing power. Mm-hmm. And its relevance to the customer's needs or wants or desires. And that's really important, because in any economy, in any offering of an economy, because of the learning curve and that we've talked about with George Gilder, prices are going to get commoditized. It's kind of like the law of gravity. There's just constant force. Now, of course, there's things you can do to counteract that and push back. And we've talked about that on a lot of shows. But what this really does is it gives you an opportunity to think through how to decommoditize your offering, whatever it might be, and get more pricing power. It's not the only goal, but it's one of the goals. And so when this is a typical graph, and we'll definitely put this in the show notes. I know it's hard to follow on a podcast, but on the vertical axis, you have undifferentiated to differentiated, from low to high. And then on the horizontal axis, you have pricing power. And obviously on the left-hand side, you have low pricing power. On the right-hand side, you have high pricing power. And of course, relevance to customer needs goes from low to high too on the other end. And then now they start at the extracting commodities level, which is the agricultural economy. So they kind of go through they don't talk about the hunter-gatherer so much, but extracting commodities is kind of when we started really trading, goods and services internationally, at least. And those things are fungible, and those are things that we extract. So lumber, oil, when we discovered a use for that, we started extracting oil, grow crops, things like that, corn, maize, all of that stuff.
Eggs,
yep. And so that was extracting commodities, and commodities are fungible. They're very hard to differentiate. You can't really differentiate Farmer Joe's wheat from Farmer John's wheat, say. And so they're heuristic, and I love this because the first time I heard him say this was when we interviewed him. He kind of peeled back the curtain and on how they kind of thought about this progression. And they said at each level, so at the extracting commodity level, they said, how do we decommoditize a commodity in this case? Mm-hmm. And that's how they said, well, if you take various commodities, you can put them together and you can make a tangible good, like bread, wheat, flour, other ingredients, and you can actually make bread. And we see this with different types of bread, wheat, rye, just like milk, right? You walk down a milk aisle today, I'm just amazed at all the different types of milk. And because now you're making a good that includes commodities, the commodities are subsumed in the good, and you're pricing the good, and that does give you more pricing power, right? And that's kind of how we follow this progression. So what do you think about that?
No, it's absolutely, it's brilliant. And what I like about it is it does a couple of things just even from a strategic level. First of all, not only does it give you more pricing power, but at the same time, it gives you higher relevance to the customer needs.
Yes.
And increases differentiation. So we've talked about this on a previous show where we talk about strategy and the 3C model from Kenichi Omai. This notion that you have the competition, the customer, and then the company, and they're on three elements of a triangle. And what you're trying to do is differentiate yourself from the competition so that you can meet the needs of the customer, because the customer is at the top of the pyramid, and you and your competition are trying to get to those needs up the sides. But in order to do that, you need to differentiate it. So it really plugs in quite nicely with what we've talked about previously in terms of strategy. In other words, increasing relevance to customer and at the same time differentiating what it is that you're offering.
Right. And as you think about it, when we moved from the agricultural economy into the industrial economy, and we started making goods on a mass scale, economies of scale, the Model T, I think of all the washing machines and, all the home appliances that came out in that era. It's just amazing that we were able to mass, produce all of these things. And then in the 1920s, economists started to notice, hey, there's another sector that's coming online. We're starting to see more employment in that sector, more output from that sector. And it doesn't necessarily make a tangible good. It delivers services. And those are delivered on time when the customer needs it. Maybe it's a waiter or waitress in a restaurant. Maybe it's a bank teller. Maybe it's an insurance adjuster. They started to see this growth in services. And it's so funny, Ed, because a lot of people date the service economy back to like the 1980s, because Carl Albrecht, father of total quality service, actually wrote a book called Service America. And he kind of dated it around there. But it actually dates back to the 1920s. And so we've been in the service economy. And what that did, since that's an intangible offering, what Pine and Gilmore were saying is, if you can wrap a service around the product that you've made, then you're going to be more relevant to the customer. You're going to have higher differentiation and more pricing power. And just one example I like to use, just because it's so interesting, is the General Electric or Pratt Whitney, Rolls-Royce make airplane engines. They wrapped a service around it and said, we will make sure that the engine is continuously functioning, and you'll only pay for when it's in the air. And that gave them an incentive to keep the engine running and to do preventive maintenance, look for cracks and hairline fractures and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, they're doing Internet of Things to check all that. But that was a great way to wrap a service around a good that's become commoditized and make it more differentiated and give you more pricing power.
Great. We're up against our first break. Want to remind our listeners they can get a hold of Ron or me by sending an email to asktsoe at now thresholdnow.com. Asktsoe at thresholdnow.com. The VeriSage one will still work, but start using the Threshold Now one. We would love for you to listen to the show or join our Patreon channel at patreon.com/TSOE. There you can listen to the show commercial free, as well as get our bonus episodes. And please do check out what Ron and I are talking about today, our new entity, which is thresholdnow.com/join. We've got lots of opportunities, including a free forever option that we call our foundation level. Love for you to explore that. But right now, a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Soul of Enterprise, where we are talking about crossing the threshold. A new chapter begins. That new chapter is for Ron and I, as we have created this new entity called Threshold. The website is thresholdnow.com if you want to check it out. But Ron, we were talking about this progression of economic value from Joe Pine, and we had just left off with the delivery of services as being the way that you differentiate goods. So if you want to differentiate goods, you've got to add services to it. Well, the next level up is the experiences. Now, I already gave the example of the gumball machine, but take us through this. What do we mean when we differentiate a service? Because that becomes, been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Now, what's the next level to stage that experience?
Right. And this is where, and when they came out with the book, it was obviously called The Experience Economy. Every business is a theater. And they were arguing, and I think rightfully so, and they've been proven right, that we were moving more. People weren't just buying goods and services. They wanted an experience. So they'd go to take their family to Disney World or whatever and spend thousands of dollars, and then they'd have memories and memorabilia from that trip and all of that, and Taylor Swift concerts and various things that, we've heard this now since, probably since I would say the Great Recession, maybe, that, the younger generation wants experiences, right? They don't necessarily want to own things. They're more into having experience with friends or family. And I think they nailed this. And what they said about experiences, what makes experiences different is the customer is paying the business money to spend time with them, with the business, not in terms of billable hours, but to get into the park and spend 5 days at Disney World. They're actually spending money to experience the offering. So it's more than just goods and services, especially when Disney provided the food packages and the lodging, and it was all inclusive, when they did that bundle. And the experience was really the new offering. And it subsumed all the prior levels. It subsumed the services, it subsumed the goods, the food, and the other things that you buy. And it was all about the experience. And so I think they nailed that. And, he does, in some of his current writings, he does cite the size of the experience economy. And I can't remember what it was, but it's a pretty good chunk of GDP.
What is actually really more experiences.
Yep, like cruise ships and travel vacations and sporting. If you had season tickets to the Warriors, that would be counted in an experience, right? That's not necessarily a good or a service. It's an experience.
Well, and is it also true that experience can also be something that you don't have to? It doesn't have to be delivered on a particular site. Like it can be outside of a particular geography.
Exactly. It could be. I mean, he's written eloquently about virtual and augmented, reality and all of that. But I mean, going to the Grand Canyon, the national parks, all of that type of thing can be an experience. And they do a great job in the book and in subsequent editions of the book. I think the book is on its third edition, of laying out different types of experiences. Now, we're not going to get into that, but there are different types of experiences. But what they have in common is they're all memorable to each individual. And we are paying the business to spend time with it. So I kind of think like a performer, like somebody like George Carlin or Dave Chappelle, where you're paying to go and see them, to spend time with them. And if you think about it, what's interesting is most businesses have to spend money to get the customer's attention. And with experiences, the customer is freely giving their attention and their money to spend time with the business.
Right. And I think that's really the key differentiator is that they are willingly spending their time with you. Remember, we talked about this when we talked about our show. It's not the customer's time. It is about time, but not yours. It's about the customer's time. Right. And them willingness to say, yes, I want to spend time with you.
Right, right. And we're going to have more to say about that too,
Yes.
because there's a framework within this progression that's really interesting. But Ed, when he got to experiences, because the heuristic, the question at every one of these levels was, how do you decommoditize a good? Well, you wrap a service around it. How do you decommoditize a service? You wrap an experience. What happens when the experience becomes a commodity? Like you said, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, right? How many times can you see Billy Joel or Bruce Springsteen or probably even Taylor
Ron.
Swift? Yeah, I know. You might hold the record for that. But what's next? Now, the only example, he had a couple examples in the book of transformations. And the one I remember was the difference between going to the gym and having just, one of the employees there, like a weight trainer, help you work out and, do all that versus a personal trainer. And he said the personal trainer is taking responsibility for transforming you to some aspirational level you have. Maybe it's about how much you can bench press or your BMI, whatever it might be. And because they're taking responsibility for that, they're going to make sure that you listen to them. If you don't listen to them, they're probably going to fire you, because the last thing they need is a walking billboard of, they're an unfit person who's obviously not getting anything out of this deal. And another example he gave was he was a pretty good golfer, I think at the time, maybe a 15 handicap, and he went to a golf pro and he said, I'd love to be a single digit golfer. And the pro had him swing and checked out his swing and probably thought to himself, yeah, this guy's got, the mechanics and everything to probably do this if he worked hard enough. And he said, well, my lessons are, $150 an hour or whatever. And Joe said, no, you don't understand. I want to be a single digit. If you get me there, I'll give you 10 grand. And I don't care what it takes. And I don't care, if you did it in a week, I'd be thrilled. The sooner the better, right? And now the point, I don't want people to get hung up on the pricing of this. That's not my point. The point is that just like our favorite definition of a professional, someone who takes responsibility for creating a result rather than performing a task. A lesson is just a service, but getting Joe to a single digit handicap is a transformation. Because when you guide a transformation, and that's all you can ever do, you can only guide them. You can't force them. You can't really offer them. You stage them. They're staged by experiences, but the customer has to want to change, because when you guide a transformation, the customer's the product. And I don't mean that in the bad social media way. If the app's free, you're the product. I mean that is you are changing the customer. Now, there's different types of transformations and all of that in degree and kind and large and small. But the point is, you're actually taking that customer from where they are to where they want to be, some desired future state. And Joe actually did find a pro who worked with him like that. And when I think about that, Ed, I think about that pro must have been banging on his door or calling him at 6 a.m. Hey, get up, we're going to go play 18. He went out and played with them, because that's really what you need to do to get somebody, his handicap down into single digits.
And I think that one of the key words he also uses is that it has to be the aspiration of the person. In fact, he recommends that you call some of these people aspirants. That's what they are. They aspire to whatever, right? So it's even beyond the concept. So it's just a great way to say. But he does say this, and I like this concept, that you still then do this by delivering a set of staged experiences in order to do that.
Because you're going to have milestones along this journey.
Correct.
I think about him with his golf pro, because I took lessons when I was a kid, and the golf pro, he did take me out and play. Now, he didn't play 18 with me. He played a few holes with me. But he just wanted to see, what I did when I got behind a tree or in the trap or in some type of trouble. And I got to believe when your son Sean was doing his baseball, that you watched that transformation over the years. It must have been kind of incredible to see.
Yeah, it was really neat. My wife was a little bit put off by when he first started doing pitching lessons, which were roughly a half hour or so each. It says he only threw the ball like 5 times. Yep.
Wow.
because the rest of it was conversation about technique, about why you want to do this, about what's behind the everything that we're talking about here. He's like, sure, he only threw the ball 5 times. Like, yeah, that's
Yeah, there's so much behind the pitch, though. The wind up, the coming off the rubber, and all.
Yeah.
Geez, it's complicated.
Yeah, very complicated.
Wow. Yeah. So so now Joe believes that, and he's been asked for years, and he said this when we interviewed him. He's been asked for years, give us more examples of transformations, and he tried his best, but now since about I think it was February of last year, he has been working on a new book called The Transformation Economy. It is due out, I believe, February 3rd, 2026. And it's called The Transformation Economy. It's going to be published by Harvard Business Review Harvard Business Press, sorry, and not the review. And he'll probably have an article in Harvard Business Review prior to the book coming out.
Sure.
But, and I just, he's been doing a Substack where he has been putting out the chapters, including all of the research that he's done, all the articles and books he's looking at and everything. And he's been throwing that out to his subscribers. And we've been marinating in that material for well over a year now. And I'm just floored by the number of examples he's come up with, as have others. And we've interviewed one of them. But I have no doubt, Ed, that he's right about this. We are moving out of experiences and into a new economic era where the offering is guiding these transformations. And it's going to subsume, just like all the other levels did, all of the prior offerings. It's not that the goods and services go away, or even that the experiences go away, is they get subsumed into transformations. And now it's just, you're pricing the transformation, essentially. You're no longer pricing the goods and the services. And the quick example I can think of is, when you buy an iPhone, you get it at Verizon, they give you the iPhone because they want you to sign up for the service. It's the same type of thing. That's what we mean by subsuming. And we're going to give a couple examples when we come back from the break. 2 quick things on this. One, Ron's too modest to mention that one of the resources that Joe Pine cites in his offerings on his website is Ron's book and Paul Dunn's book, Time's Up. So you're being referenced by the best, Ron. So that's some great stuff. And just to clean one thing up, the episode you were talking about, Ron, is the one that we did with Christophe Jacquet, which is episode 518, which is Trends in the Transformation Economy. So if you want to listen to some of the great examples that Christophe came up with, that's the place to go. But in the meantime, if you want to get a hold of Ron or me, send an email to asktsoe@thresholdnow.com. The website is The Soul of Enterprise, or thresholdnow.com. We could check those out too. But right now, a word from our sponsors.
We are back on the Soul of Enterprise. We are talking about crossing the threshold, a new chapter begins, and that's a reference to the new chapter that Ron and I are exploring, which is thresholdnow.com. Check that out, thresholdnow.com/join for some information on joining us, including up at a free level, which we call our foundation level. Love for you to visit us there. But Ron, I wanted to give maybe an example of this progression of economic value. We've alluded a little bit to you, but I want to give you the entire story. Let's start back with extracted commodities like eggs and wheat. The next we said we wanted to make a good out of that, and we would make a good out of that by putting those things together. So we wanted to make a cake, right? So we could create the cake. We put the wheat, the eggs, the sugar together. Now we have a good. We want to deliver that as an intangible service. Well, what we can do is we can go to the grocery store where they will pre-bake the cake for you. And then the service that they'll write is they'll write happy birthday with your kid's name on it. And you can bring the sheet cake back home. And so you see there the example of subsuming, right? So when we went from going from the extracted commodities to the cake, you see that what we did there was we made this cake. And then that is no longer, we're not selling eggs and wheat, we're selling the cake. Okay. When we're selling the ability to make that cake. When we then deliver it as a service, we're selling it with the happy birthday written on it. You don't even have to make the cake at home because we're delivering that service to you. Well, then the staged experience on that, and the most famous example is Chuck E. Cheese. I've had many a birthday party for both my kids and the kids of others who were at the Chuck E. Cheese. And they have staged the experience there by saying, hey, listen, if you have your party here, we give you the sheet cake for free. It's included in the price of the experience that you have of playing the games and all of that stuff. And then to guide a transformation, and this is really interesting because it's only in the last, 8 or 9 months that we've been reading about this. Chuck E. Cheese is trying to reinvent themselves. They're getting rid of the animatronics. They're going a little bit more, trying to go a little bit more upmarket with their food and beverage and all of this as well. And they're starting to offer a subscription service to the parents because they realize is that having your birthday at Chuck E. Cheese is really cool when you're 5 up through about the time that you're 10. And then it's not cool anymore. And then you do not want your friends going to your Chuck E. Cheese birthday party anymore. So they've positioned this as, well, if we can get them on a subscription for this 5-year period, we can actually help them with this transformation from being a toddler to being a prepubescent adult, prepubescent, a tween, if you will, right? So they're helping with that transformation and a consistent transformation. And I think, now, will it work? Don't really know, right? But I think it's a pretty interesting example of what we're talking about. Now, Ron, what I'd like you to go into a little bit more detail. First of all, give your example that you have, and then there's also the time saved, time well spent, and time well invested component to this as well. But I know you have an example that you want to share as
right. And I haven't seen this store yet, but there's a grocery store called Italy. I think it's Eatly, so play on Italy. It's an Italian grocery store, but they also have other things in there as well. And what's fascinating about this, Ed, is it covers the entire progression of economic value. So you can obviously buy commodities there, like not olive oil, but things that olives. Olives, things that are very authentic Italian. I guess they're a big importer. They're probably going to get nailed with some tariffs, but you can buy commodities there. Obviously, you can buy goods there, just like a regular grocery store. Services, they have Italian themed cafes, where you can get an espresso and all of that. And they also have nice restaurants. Some are quick cafes, you can get a sandwich, or some have tablecloths, and it's more upscale. And so it's more of an experience to go in there and have lunch. Our colleague Dan Morris has done. He says they got some really good food in there. So they cover the gamut all the way up to the experience. And then you say, well, okay, how does Italy provide a transformation? Well, they have cooking classes. And it circles all the way back. They take the raw commodities and they teach you how to make pesto or gnocchi or whatever. And it is such an awesome example of covering the entire gamut of these economic offerings. I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, really neat and I've seen there's a couple of restaurants that are or places that are like that now. That's Italy is but one of them. There are several that I've seen that have that kind of thing where you can go in and experience. Even Whole Foods in certain locations will offer cooking classes as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure, sure.
So
And farms do this too. Joe had written a great example of an apple farm. You could go there and you could actually pick the apples. So that would be like, extracting the commodities. And then they taught you how to make apple cider. And then they delivered a service with a meal with, apple cider and apple pie and all of that. And that was done right on the farm, in the farm. So that was the experience. And then, of course, they also offered cooking and how to make all these apple recipes. So they ran the gamut too. And you see that with some of these farm experiences, that you can pay to go milk the cow and churn butter and all. My dad laughs at this because he goes, I had to do this as a kid. It was called chores. and now I'm paying for my kid to do this, and it's not cheap, by the way. But we see it somewhat with wineries too. They'll take you out into the vineyards and let you pick, and that's just it's really interesting because one of the things that Pine talks about is as you move up this curve, how we'll start to pay like nostalgia for the prior levels. We're still buying LPs, right? And all of that. So there's a little bit more nuance to this curve, but the overall arc of this is these are economic offerings. It's not just a business model, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if you don't think this is relevant to your business, because as we move into more and more guiding of transformations, the goods and services are just going to be commoditized. In fact, Joe Pine deliberately spells goods and services as one word, meaning they're just being commoditized. And unless you move up to experiences, or better yet, transformations, which we think professionals are poised to do, you're going to be commoditized, and it's going to be really hard to compete with a lot of the other offerings out there if that's all you're doing is goods and services.
Okay. So let's talk now a little bit about this notion of time saved, time spent, and time well invested. And I think it's pretty clear that the delivery of services was about time saved, right? When you would do, if I'm an accountant and I do somebody's tax return for them, what am I doing? I'm saving them the time of having to do the tax return themselves. They've got to do it on their own. So I'm clearly saving them time. And the mistake, of course, that we made was charging. Oh no, we're going to charge for our time doing your tax. I mean, it makes no sense. We really should be saying no. We're going to charge you for the time we're saving you. That's
right. Based on your opportunity cost.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which is why we said if anybody should fill out a timesheet, it should be the customer.
Yeah.
Right. But it would have to be a negative timesheet because it was how long would it have taken you to do this on your own? Right. So that's this notion of time saved. Well, once we get to experiences, we're talking about time well spent. You are going to an experience and you're saying, hey, listen, I want to enjoy this experience, the Taylor Swift concert, as you said, going to see Dave Chappelle live. Those are all examples of time well spent. Any live theater performances, obviously a staged experience, quite literally. But then there's this next thing, which is time well invested once we get to transformations. And for a while, Ron, it was hard for me to get my mind around that until I thought about Joe Pine's example of the golf pro. And I said, well, the stage experience was him spending time with the golf pro, FaceTime with the golf pro. But the time well invested means it's going even beyond that, because Joe is going to have to work outside of the time that he's spending with his pro and invest his time even when the pro's not around.
Bingo. Yep. That's exactly right. Yep.
So I think that that's really the key, is that once you get to the point where you're working with someone and they're saying, well, not only am I spending time with you, but I am now I'm going to work on this above and beyond just our time together.
Yeah. Because it's really important with these transformations, as you can imagine. It's some type of from to statement. So I want to go from a double-digit handicap golfer to a single-digit. Well, okay, the pro can get you there, but chances are at some point you're going to slide back. And that probably means you're not investing enough of your time when the pro's not there by playing or what. And he's got to make sure that transformation sustains through time. And that's one of the obligations that the guide has, to make sure that the customer doesn't slip back.
And I was thinking about this in terms of just the example that you gave with my son pitching lessons. And yes, this guy, the folks that we do, they all just charge by the hour. What they really should do is charge by the miles per hour that they get out of the kid, right?
That'd be a lot more meaningful, wouldn't it?
Right. It would be like, yeah, once your kid is throwing 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour, you know what? If you could have said, listen, we can get Sean up to like 90, 92 miles an hour, and I will pay you $25,000. Yep, because then I know he's going to get a full ride somewhere on a baseball scholarship.
That's a great example, actually. Yeah. The other thing is, Ed, and this competing for customer time, the framework, and this is Joe Pine's framework, to be clear. I just love this because he says, let's go back to time well saved for a minute. We buy goods and services to save time, right? We buy a hammer or an electric drill to drill a, screw in the wall, hang something or mount something or whatever. Same with, you go to a place that changes your oil. They're saving you time. We all get that. But the other side of this time well saved is, don't waste the customer's time, because now you're actually is subtracting value. This is a negative value. Our favorite example is to, laugh at the 400-page organizer that we get from our CPA firm. But that is a serious waste of a customer's time. Even just opening it and looking at it going, well, are they kidding me? If I could do this, I wouldn't need them.
I remember being at conferences where they told, no, you got to send the organizer, and you want them to open it and go, oh my God, look at all of this. This is absolutely insane. I can't possibly do this. It was meant to instill fear.
Yes. And show how complicated this is. And it has the exact opposite effect, because the customer is just annoyed. but they already know they can't do their own tax return. That's why they hired you. You don't have to remind them, right? Yeah. So I think that time well saved is still really important, to strip out things that waste your customers' time. Try and make this is what I love about the Amazon Prime example, is it's just seamless and frictionless and easy. And it comes the same day, sometimes, or the next day. And one-click ordering.
I'm ready for so one day it's going to happen, Ron. Something's going to show up at my house, and I'm going to go, oh yeah, I meant to order that.
Yeah. I know they're going to anticipate, but yeah. That's when your fridge talks to your pantry or something. And then of course, time well spent, like you said, going to Disney World or a concert, but also every interaction that we have, and I'm talking professionals, with the customer, whether it be face-to-face or on Zoom or whatever, they've got to feel like, wow, that was time well spent. And that can be so easy. You can ask them a beautiful question. You can, make them think about something, or maybe show them something that you recently read that's relevant to them. And so they walk away, and every time they walk away from those interactions, they say, geez, I love talking to Dad. He always makes me think, or he always has something, new to tell me. And boy, those small things add up over time.
This is what excites me about this, Ron, because one of the conversations that I've had with people have been explaining what we've been doing to some people. And they say, well, doesn't this mean that all of the stuff that you've done previously is out the window? And I'm like, no, it's subsumed. Asking effective questions is still important. Understanding value is still important. Subscription pricing is still important. Even properly understood project management is important, because we're going to take some of those concepts and adapt it to the new way of thinking. We probably will see scope go away, because we like to say it's going to be whatever's covered. But the whole idea of covered, not covered, is a subsummation of scope. It subsumes scope. And I think that's what's important. Well, Ron, we're up against our last break. Want to remind you can get a hold of Ron or me by sending an email to asktsoe@thresholdnow.com. The website is The Soul of Enterprise, where you can see show notes as well as previews to upcoming shows. Love for you to also check out our Patreon channel, patreon.com/TSOE, where you can listen to the show commercial free as well as our bonus episodes. But right now, a word from our sponsor, including Woodard.
Welcome back, everybody. We're crossing the threshold. A new chapter begins. Ed, I love new chapters because I don't have to write a book, just a chapter. So that's cool.
Yeah, but one chapter leads to another, and next thing you know, it's a book.
Yeah. The other thing that Joe Pine has been talking about when he's been writing on transformations is the purpose of business. Now, we've done some shows on purpose, and I love what he's come up with because it just encapsulates everything. He said, when you really look at aspirants, as he likes to call customers, they have aspirations. And what do those aspirations revolve around? And he says, to borrow from Ben Franklin, he said they revolve around being healthy, wealthy, and wiser. Now, he's taken that framework and he's added to it. And this is kind of what I want to get your opinion on, Ed, because I love what he's done here. He said what aspirants really want is they want health and well-being. They want wisdom and understanding, and they want wealth and prosperity. And he's added a fourth, purpose and meaning. And the reason he's linked two words is one is the and the second word is the ends. So for instance, wealth and prosperity is probably the one that we can have the biggest effect on for accountants anyway. Now, yes, customers want to build wealth, but why? This is where you get into the 5 whys, right? Why do you want wealth? Well, because I want to take care of my elderly parents, because I want to buy a dream home, second home, or I want to do my bucket list, or I want to take care of my heirs, or I want to leave a legacy to, philanthropy or whatever it might be. In other words, the wealth is a means, the end is prosperity. And it's the same with health and well-being, right? We want to be healthy because we want to live a full life. We want purpose and meaning. Purpose is what gives us meaning. And wisdom gives us, hopefully, understanding. And he sums it all up by saying, really, the purpose of business is human flourishing because it contributes to all of these. When he wrote that for the first time that I ever saw it, I was just blown away by that because that really does sum it up.
Yeah, it really, and this is something that we've been hearing from Russ Roberts and his great podcast, Econ Talk, for a long, long time. And I don't know if he's ever said it as the purpose of business is human flourishing, but he talks an awful lot about human flourishing.
Yes,
and that what our end goal is. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I adopted to my personal why, added and business is the purpose of human flourishing before I heard Joe Pine say it. So mostly because of listening to Russ Roberts and this notion of human flourishing. But what the other thing that I really like about the healthier, wealthier, wiser, and and live with more purpose. And Joe makes this point almost every time he talks about it, is that you don't have to gin up demand for them.
These are universal aspirations. Everybody desires to be healthier, wealthier, wiser, and live with purpose. And therefore, it's not about marketing to gin up demand for this type of car or this offering or what. No, we have to uncover.
It's a discovery process.
Discovery process through the relationship and through better questioning. Spending more time with the customer, asking them more beautiful questions. And Ed, that's why I'm also excited by this, because I believe the only way to really effectuate those types of conversation and that type of attention is the subscription model. Because you can't do this if you're working in a factory with 2,000 customers. It's not going to happen. It's got to be less customers, like the direct primary care doctors, concierge doctors, where you can have a bigger impact and guide these transformations. And it needs to also be said that professionals can guide these transformations serially, one after the other. And from womb to tomb, we can help somebody. And that's why I'm so excited by this, because it opens up whole new vistas of value creation.
Yeah. And I really can't wait to talk to Joe Pine about this, having now read his work for the better part of the last year or so, since he's been coming out with these chapters and just conversations about it. It's just going to be so fascinating about it. And you can tell that he has thought really deeply about this. But one of the things that I really do appreciate about him is I think, like us, he is appreciative of the fact that these transformations, and we used to use this is a direct quote, we would say all transformations are linguistic. And he gets that. He gets this, that we have to begin to change the language around things. So we've even talked a little bit about this, that there was an hourly billing language, there was a value pricing language, and now there's a threshold language. So let's talk a little bit about those. The first one, of course, is healthier, wealthier, wiser, more purpose. That's the one that's up there.
Right. As opposed to training or education, right? It's now we're going after healthier, wealthier, and wiser.
What would be some others, Ron, that would strike you that you want to share? We've got about 5 minutes left, so 4 minutes left.
I never liked the word client. You and I railed against that. So when we were talking value pricing, we'd always talk about the customer. And now I think member is just a great word. We always go back to the American Express advertisement, membership has its privileges. I also could see audience. I think audience is a very interesting word, because again, an audience is somebody who's paying to spend time with the business, right? And that's kind of an interesting concept. Or Joe Pine would say aspirant. I'm not there yet on that one, Ed, but I do like member.
I like member too, but I think there's room for aspirant as well, because I think that there's a membership piece of it, and then there's an aspirant piece. And look, even the way that we're working at Threshold, I think we have 2 levels of members really, and then we have an aspirant level, which is the folks that work directly with us. They're in the aspiration category, I would say.
Yeah, and either way, I love the fact that we're changing the language, whether you go with member, audience, or aspirant, because that's what Walt Disney did with Disneyland. He changed the language of the whole enterprise, and that just gave him more differentiation from the competition, and of course more pricing power. But it's just really exciting to change some of the language. The other one I like, of course, I never did like staff. We said team members, but now I really do like colleague. I just think a firm is a collection of colleagues. And another one that I really like is, as opposed to talking about needs and wants, or even the value conversation, now we can have a threshold transformation and really talk about what's their desired future state. Are they ready to make that transformation? That's part of the diagnostic and triage process, as Joe Pine says. And we can stage experiences to guide that transformation.
Yeah. Leveraging off the client, customer, member, aspirant. I also like the language of, instead of taking on customers versus chasing the right customers, versus now choosing the right members. The people that are in alignment with you on that. And I think that's That's such an important piece. And yeah, I happen to love the notion of colleague. And let me just jump into that, and maybe we'll sign off after this. But what I really love about colleague is the fact that it's also inclusive of people not necessarily in your organization. And yes. I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind. So yes, we're colleagues inside the firm, the organization, but we're also more collegial with those even outside of us who are maybe in our profession or just members of the human race.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I love that. So yeah, Ed, I am just so excited by this whole transformation thing. And now, because we've been marinating in it so long, and there's so many examples that we're starting to see of big companies, Nike, Audi, Mayo Clinic, starting to use this language in their marketing, in their offering, that I just, it's kind of like the backwards bicycle. I just can't, when I see websites that tout goods and services, especially services, I cringe, because you're just commoditizing yourself.
Well, and it's products and services, right? It's right. Like, because there's this big movement still toward productization, the productization of everything.
And that's going backwards on the progression of econ. This is why I don't like productized services. It's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah, it's going backward on the model. So. Well, Ron, next week we have one of our own. We're going a Verisage fellow at one point, and on again, off again because of his relationship. But we're excited to welcome back for a second time Mark Koziel, who is now the chair of the AICPA.
I can't wait, Ed. I'll see you in 167 hours.
This has been The Soul of Enterprise, Business in the Transformation Economy. Sponsored by Woodard, building your ideal practice with coaching, education, community, and resources. Join us next week at 3 p.m. Eastern, that's noon Pacific. In the meantime, visit us out on the web at www.thesoulofenterprise.com and Threshold